Dumoise used to be the doctor in Meridki, a small town in Punjab, northwest India. He was a chubby, laid-back guy, and he married a woman who was just as round and easygoing as he was. After they got married, it was like they disappeared from the world. They were so happy, just the two of them. Meanwhile, life in Meridki carried on without them. But Dumoise's decision to shut himself off from everything turned out to be a mistake. There was a typhoid outbreak in town and his wife got sick. He didn't realize it was more than just a fever until 5 days had already passed. Then it took him another 3 days to talk to Mrs. Shute, the wife of the local engineer. When he finally did, he was so nervous about bringing it up that she nearly lost her temper. "It's criminal you waited this long to tell anyone," she snapped, before rushing off to help his wife. That winter, 7 people in Meridki came down with typhoid. For 56 days, we fought the disease and managed to save them all. Well, almost. Just when things seemed to be under control, Mrs. Dumoise took a sudden turn for the worse. Within a week, she was gone. The whole town came to her funeral. At the graveside, Dumoise broke down sobbing, and his friends had to lead him away. After the funeral, Dumoise went back to their house alone. He didn't want help from anyone. He kept doing his job well enough, but we all told him he needed a break. He agreed and decided to go on a hiking trip in the hills of northeast India. He packed a gun and a big camera, planning to take pictures and distract himself from his grief. His servant, Ram Das, went with him to carry his bags. Ram Das wasn't exactly reliable, lazy and a bit shady, but he had been Mrs. Dumoise's favourite, so Dumoise let him handle things. On his way back from the hills, Dumoise stopped at a place called Bagi. The place hikers stayed at was pretty terrible, cold and exposed to the wind. He arrived around 7 p.m. and Ram Das went down the hill to the village to hire carriers for the next day. It was already dark, and the wind was picking up. Not long after, Dumoise saw Ram Das running back up the hill like he'd seen a ghost. He was sprinting so hard he practically collapsed at Dumoise's feet, nose bleeding and face pale with fear. "I've seen the Mem Sahib," Ram Das gasped. "What? Where?" Dumoise asked, stunned. "On the road to the village," Ram Das said. "She was wearing a blue dress. She looked at me from under her hat and said, 'Ram Das, tell my husband I'll meet him next month at Nudea.' I got so scared I just ran." What happened next is a bit of a mystery. According to Ram Das, Dumoise spent the night pacing in front of the house, arms stretched out like he was searching for someone, calling out for the Mem Sahib. But she never showed up. The next morning, Dumoise headed to Simla, the summer retreat of the British government. Along the way, he wouldn't stop questioning Ram Das, desperate to understand what had happened back in Bagi. Ram Das stuck to his story. He swore he'd seen Mrs. Dumoise, that she'd looked at him from under her hat and said exactly what he'd told Dumoise. He never wavered, not once. "I don't even know where Nadia is," Ram Das said firmly. "Never been there, and I won't go, not even if you pay me double." For the record, Nudea is a town in Bengal, way down in southern India. It's over 1,200 miles from Meridki, where Dumoise lived and worked. It made no sense for a doctor from Punjab to have anything to do with it. After leaving the hills, Dumoise passed through Simla without stopping and headed straight back to Meridki. There he caught up with the doctor who'd been filling in for him at the hospital. The two were old friends, so they spent the day chatting about work and catching up. That evening, Dumoise decided to tell him about what had happened in Baji. Right in the middle of their conversation, a telegram boy rushed in with a message from the government in Simla. Curious, Dumoise opened it and read aloud. Cholera epidemic at Nudia. Bengal government needs help. Punjab government sending you there. Dumoise tossed the telegram onto the table, startled. Well? He exclaimed. His friend stayed quiet for a moment, unsure what to say. Then something clicked. Wait, you passed through Simla earlier. Did you already know about this? Did you volunteer because you're, trying to... Before he could finish, Dumoise cut him off. Not at all. This is the first I've heard of it. But if it's my time to go, I won't fight it. The two of them packed up Dumoise's things in the dim light, working mostly in silence. Eventually, Ram Das came in with a lantern and asked, Where's the Sahib going? To Nudia, Dumoise replied softly. Hearing this, Ram Das immediately dropped to the floor, clutching at Dumoise's legs and begging him not to go. He wailed and pleaded, refusing to stop until they made him leave the room. When he returned later, he'd made up his mind. I won't go to Nadia and watch the Sahib die, or risk dying myself, Ram Das said bluntly. He asked for his wages and a reference letter. Dumoise didn't argue. He paid Ram Das, wrote the reference, and set off for Nadia alone. 11 days later, Dumoise joined his wife, not in Nudia, but in death. Cholera claimed his life in the very hospital he'd gone to help. The Bengal government had to find someone else to fight the epidemic.